In the year 1720, the winter wind howled against the crimson walls of the forbidden city, but within the palace, silence weighed heavier than the snow. A young concubine, barely past her teenage years, was being led through a narrow corridor lit only by oil lamps. The flickering glow stretched shadows across the stone floor, making the path appear endless, as if it were leading her into another world. She clutched her robe tighter, her heart pounding, for she knew where she was going. Tonight, she would stand before the Son of Heaven. Yet before she could cross the threshold of the Emperor's chamber, an older attendant stepped forward, halting her. The woman's voice was low, but sharp enough to cut through the stillness like a blade. Remember the rules. They are older than you, heavier than you. Forget them, and you will never leave this place alive. The concubine bowed her head, but her trembling fingers betrayed her fear. Rules? She had heard whispers of them, but never the full truth. Now each step toward the Emperor was not only a step into intimacy, but a descent into a labyrinth of invisible laws, crafted to erase her humanity and preserve his power. The first law was never to turn her back. Not upon entering, not upon leaving, not even in her sleep. To expose one's back to the Emperor was to insult heaven itself, for he was the axis of the cosmos. She would crawl forward on her knees, eyes downcast, body bent low. To withdraw, she would shuffle backward, careful never to turn. It was not intimacy. It was submission carved into the body. The Emperor's paranoia demanded it. Surrounded by whispers of daggers and plots, he allowed no woman to claim the natural freedom of posture. The second law was harsher still. Erase your name. Inside that chamber, a concubine ceased to exist as herself. She could not speak her name, nor use words of affection. To address him was only through the most distant of titles. Your Majesty, Son of Heaven. Any other word was forbidden. This was no accident. By stripping away names, the Emperor stripped away identity. He did not want companions or lovers. He wanted vessels, faceless and interchangeable. A woman's laughter, her accent, her memories, everything dissolved into silence. Then came the law of the eyes. Never meet his gaze unless commanded. His stare was considered divine, too fierce for mortal eyes to endure. To look directly without permission was to invite disaster, mockery at best, execution at worst. So intimacy unfolded without sight. A concubine could feel his breath, the weight of his presence, yet never truly see him. He was both man and myth, flesh and phantom. The fourth law silenced the most natural sound of all, the voice of desire. No gasp, no whisper, no moan of pleasure could escape. The chamber was not a sanctuary of warmth, but a theater of control. A misplaced sound might be taken as mockery, as insolence. Silence was safer. Silence was survival. And so desire itself became a dangerous language, one they were forbidden to speak. As the young concubine listened to these rules, her chest tightened. She had once believed that to be chosen for the Emperor's harem was an honor, a path to influence, even power. But standing now before the carved gates of the chamber, she felt the weight of truth pressing in on her. This was not love, nor even life. This was the slow transformation into a shadow. When at last she was permitted to enter, she did so with eyes lowered, without a name, without a voice. The Emperor reclined upon silken cushions, his expression unreadable. His voice, when it came, was calm, absolute and colder than stone. Do not forget, you are here because I allow it. Nothing more. The concubine knelt, trembling, the blood pounding in her ears. Behind her, the heavy doors closed with a sound like thunder. Within that chamber, time itself seemed to stop. The rules had already begun to swallow her whole. The night deepened, and the lamps burned lower, casting the Emperor's chamber into a haze of shadow and gold. The concubine remained kneeling, her body stiff, her breath shallow. She thought the first set of rules had been harsh enough, yet there were more. Stranger, darker, rules whispered through generations of palace women, rules that carried the weight of life and death. The fifth law was the law of touch. No concubine was permitted to touch the emperor unless he commanded it. Even the brush of a hand, the graze of a finger, could be punished. Her body might be pressed into his presence, yet she could not initiate contact. She was to be passive, pliant, as though carved from jade. This stripped away the last illusion of mutuality. Affection could not bloom where every gesture was chained. The emperor's touch was a privilege. Hers was a crime. The sixth law dictated the bed itself. Few knew the truth beyond these walls. The emperor did not always sleep through the night. Fear of assassination haunted him. Servants would shift his resting place in secret patterns, sometimes moving him from one chamber to another under cover of darkness. Even concubines who shared his bed were forbidden to reveal which couch, which corner, which silk drape had held his body. To speak of it was to invite immediate execution. The emperor's sleep was not rest. It was strategy. His very dreams locked in secrecy. The seventh law was written into the morning ritual. At dawn, when the act was over, the concubine was not permitted to remain. She would be escorted away in silence, her robes hastily gathered, her body trembling with the weight of exhaustion and fear. The emperor never said farewell. There was no lingering glance, no soft word. Once she crossed the threshold, she ceased to exist in his world until she was summoned again, if she was ever summoned at all. It was then, in the cold corridors of early morning, that the concubines truly felt the cruelty of the system. Some would never be called back. Some would be forgotten entirely, their youth fading behind painted screens until death claimed them. Others might rise in favor for a time, only to be cast aside without warning. Everything depended on the emperor's whim, and the rules ensured that his whim was absolute. For the young concubine, the realization struck like a blade. She had dreamed once of beauty and power, of being adorned in jewels, of having the emperor's favor lift her family from obscurity. But within the chamber's walls, beneath the crushing silence of ritual, she discovered the truth. She was not a woman in the eyes of the empire. She was an instrument, a vessel, a shadow moving within shadows. The rules had a deeper purpose than mere control. They were a theater, a performance meant to remind all who entered that the emperor was not simply a man, but the living axis of the universe. Every kneel, every backward shuffle, every silenced word reinforced his divinity. To the outside world, the palace shimmered with glory. Yet here, in the heart of its chambers, glory was built upon fear, erasure, and silence. The concubine lay that night with her eyes closed, careful not to breathe too deeply, careful not to stir. She thought of her family, of her childhood laughter, of the girl she used to be. But already those memories felt like another life, distant and unreachable. She was being rewritten, reshaped into something hollow. And as the emperor drifted into guarded sleep, she realized the cruelest rule of all was unspoken. Once you entered this life, you could never truly return to who you were before. When dawn's first light pierced the window lattice, attendants swept in with cold efficiency. They dressed her, veiled her face, and led her away. Behind her, the chamber returned to silence, as though she had never been there at all. Outside, the forbidden city stood in magnificent stillness. To the crowds beyond its gates, the emperor was the son of heaven, the center of a glorious empire. But to the women within, he was a shadowed god, unreachable, untouchable, and surrounded by laws that devoured every breath of their humanity. And so, the concubine walked back through the corridors, her feet numb upon the stone. She was alive, yes, but not entirely. For part of her had been left behind in that golden prison, dissolved into silence. The rules had done their work. The days that followed blurred into one another. The concubine waited in her quarters, surrounded by silks and attendants, yet her world felt smaller than ever. Outside, courtyards shimmered in winter light, but she could not walk freely there. Every step in the palace was watched, every whisper weighed. To live in the Forbidden City was to live in a cage painted gold. Within that cage, jealousy grew like weeds. Hundreds of women shared the same fate, each hoping for a fleeting glance, a single night, a child who might lift her from obscurity into power. They smiled at one another during ceremonies, but behind those smiles hid sharpened daggers. A kind word might mask a curse. A gift might conceal poison. The rules that bound them to silence in the emperor's chamber also bound them to endless rivalry outside it. The eighth rule, never spoken aloud but understood by all, was the rule of secrecy among concubines themselves. None could reveal the details of another's night with the emperor. To boast was dangerous, to confess even more so. The walls had ears, and the smallest slip could reach the emperor's advisors. Punishment was swift. A woman might vanish overnight, her name struck from records, her chamber emptied before dawn. The palace devoured those who spoke too freely. The ninth rule was control over the womb. For the emperor, children were not simply family. They were weapons, heirs, threats, and pawns. A concubine who conceived gained power beyond measure, but the path to that power was steeped in peril. Herbal brews, midwives' secrets, and rival concubines' plots circled like vultures. A woman might drink what she thought was medicine for health, only to find her unborn child stolen before it could draw breath. The empire's future was carried in fragile bodies, and the rules ensured those bodies were guarded, monitored, and often sacrificed. The 10th rule was silence after departure. Concubines who aged beyond favor, who grew sick, or who fell from grace were not permitted to speak of what they had seen. Their lives became shadows of shadows, confined within distant quarters or monasteries. Even in exile, their tongues remained bound. The empire's secrets were buried not in scrolls, but in living flesh that was never allowed to tell its story. The young concubine, though still favored for her youth, soon felt these rules pressing in on her. She watched other women smile too brightly, linger too long in the corridors, or weep quietly when no one was supposed to see. She began to understand that survival was not about beauty or charm. Survival was about silence, endurance, and the careful hiding of one's true thoughts. Yet in the stillness of the night, when she lay awake staring at the painted ceiling, her mind betrayed her. She thought of freedom beyond the palace walls, of the river she once played beside as a child, of the laughter of her brothers and sisters. Those memories burned brighter because she knew they were forbidden. Here, she could not laugh freely, could not speak freely, could not even cry too loudly. Every emotion had become dangerous, and yet, some concubines resisted, not with rebellion, but with subtle acts of defiance. One woman might carve a secret mark into a wooden beam, a reminder that she existed beyond the rules. Another might keep a hidden letter from her family, folded so small it could fit into the seam of a robe. These acts were tiny, invisible to the empire, but enormous to the women themselves. They were proofs of self, sparks of humanity clinging to life inside a machine built to erase it. For the young concubine, her act of defiance was memory. Each night, after leaving the emperor's chamber, she repeated her name silently to herself as she walked back through the darkened corridors. She whispered it in her mind, over and over, as if the soundless echo could protect her from forgetting who she was. The rules demanded she erase her name, but she would not surrender it entirely. It was the last fragment of herself she could keep. And so, in the midst of gold and silence, of power and fear, she endured. Day by day, she played her part. Night by night, she whispered her name. The Forbidden City might own her body, but in the hidden corners of her soul, she carried a flame the rules could never extinguish. And so, the story comes to an end. Behind the glittering walls of the Forbidden City, we discover a world of hidden rules and silent suffering, where human beings were reduced to shadows of themselves. If you found this journey intriguing and wish to uncover more forgotten truths of history, please remember to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and ring the notification bell so you won't miss the next story. Every subscription, every share, is what inspires us to keep bringing you these untold chapters of the past. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.